Explore the Valley of the Dead King. I absolutely love this game and love this game series, and I'm going to tell you why. Valley of the Dead King is an adventure game for 1 to 6 players, and that one part is crucial for a reason we'll get into a little bit later. It's an adventure game for 1 to 6 players in which you wander around a mysterious, fantastical valley, fighting goblins and orcs, uncovering items in deep ruins, visiting shrines to get magic powers, and going from city to city buying equipment in order to level up your character. And you're leveling up your character for a very important reason. That is the ticking clock of the game, and it's the whole thing that you're fighting, the Dead King. The Dead King is a real jerk, because while you're busy wandering around the valley and uncovering quests and finding items and helping people and leveling up your character to make them more powerful and make their abilities even more impressive in combat, the Dead King is going from city to city to city, taking over those cities, turning everyone into undead, and as he's doing this, he's getting faster and faster. And when he captures the first city, he gets to the second city a little quicker, and then the third a little faster, and then the fourth a little faster. There's only 6 cities in the game, so that means the entire time that you're playing, there's a ticking clock, because once the Dead King has taken the 6th and final city, he's going to make a beeline to your party, and then you're going to have the big climactic showdown with the boss. And if you're not ready for it, he's going to curb stomp you. And so many bits and bobs and chips and pieces and colorful dice to roll and at least 3 decks of cards, and maybe even a 4th if you add that, and other land tiles and books and enough character options so that if you have all 4 and counting editions of the game, you need this big, stupid, ridiculous chest in order to store them all. It might seem like this game has a lot going on, maybe too much going on. And it does have a lot going on, but the nice thing about it is it's actually deceptively easy to play and learn because it's all very straightforward. First, we've got character creation, and character creation couldn't be any easier. You have this whole mess of character classes that you can be, but there's tons of them already. And a lot of times it's very straightforward stuff like the sorcerer or the shaman or the wilder. Though sometimes you can have even crazier ones like the floromancer who can control plants, or the wellspring channeler, which is just sort of beyond description right now. And you match up your character class card with a race card. So you can be goblin, half-elf, halfling, all pretty standard, usual stuff, but as you get further on into this series, character races can get pretty crazy, such as the shroomer, a race of fungoid people, or however you would pronounce that, a half-bear. So right now I'm playing a half-bear guy who lights himself on fire and draws enemy attacks so that the enemy is attacking him rather than his allies, to let his allies then do special abilities. There's a lot of really cool and fun variations, and when you combine all 4 games together, which you can do, and the expansions, there are hundreds of thousands of character combinations that you can do. It's kind of a little insane, but thankfully, with Valley of the Dead King, you're somewhat limited. And when I say somewhat limited, there's something like 24 different character classes and an equal number of races. It's insane. So your party is going to be made up by as few as 1 character, which you can play solo, of course, or as many as 6 characters, playing with others, or you can control up to that many characters by yourself. Though I wouldn't necessarily recommend doing it by yourself, because playing any more than, say, 3 gets to be a little unmanageable. Now, there is a free app that lets you manage all these character stats and abilities and items a little easier. You can just punch the stuff in the app and take care of it all there, and no sweat, no problem. But I prefer not to use that because when I'm playing a board game, I want to be in front of my board game. I don't want to be in front of a screen. However, if that's not a problem for you, then the app can help make this a lot easier, especially if you're playing solo. In order to make a character, you just take the stats that are on your race card, you combine them onto your class card, you add the numbers up, and that's it. Super easy, that's it. You've just made your character. That's all there is to it. There are some additional options that get added in other versions of the game and in the expansions, something called traits, another thing called aspect, and you can also get familiars, animal followers, but that's for later. Right now, those are the basics. That's all you need to do in order to create a character. And the characters are really easy to understand too. Here you have their abilities. This is their main attack ability, this is their main defense ability, this is their first mastery or first special ability, and this is their second special ability. This is how much health they have, this is how much energy they have in order to use these special abilities, and these are their various survival skills. One that helps them navigate the world, one that helps them explore the world, and one that helps them survive and eat. Here you have the food, here's where you list what items they have, and this is a description of your special abilities, and that's it. That's all there is to it. Of course, there's a racial ability for each. Again, there's not a lot to it. It's very straightforward. It's not like the hour-long character building process of Dungeons & Dragons. Game turns are also very straightforward. There's 5 steps, and they're all very easy. Your first step, your characters move. There's a couple of different ways they can move, but it's all very basic. You can move cautiously, or you can move recklessly. In the next phase, you roll your skills. That's where you get to roll some of these nice, colorful dice. The skills are very easy. You roll to see if you get lost, you roll to see if you found any gold on your way, and you roll to see whether or not you were able to forage food or if you have to eat food from your store of rations, because survival is an important part of the early game here. If you don't have enough rations, you're going to starve out in the wilderness, you're going to die, and your game's going to fizzle out very soon. Thankfully, that's only a concern in the early part of the game, because by the later part of the game, your abilities are going to be up strong enough so that you're not really worrying about food. And even if you are, you can stop in a town if they haven't been taken over by the dead king and buy new rations. Easy peasy. Then you move on to the third phase of the game. And this is where things get slightly more complicated, but not very. In the third or fourth phase of the game, that's where all the fun stuff comes into play. There's a couple of different things that can happen there. You can either stop in a city where you're going to buy new equipment, heal up your characters, and that sort of thing. Or the city might be taken over by the Dead King's forces, in which case you'll have to fight his forces first in order to liberate the city. You might stop at a shrine where you get some healing, you can get a magic blessing, turn in some quests. Same thing in the city. When you stop in a city, you can turn in some quests and get some new quests. You might uncover a ruin, where that's a very risk-reward kind of thing, where you roll some dice to figure out what might be in these ruins, what might be in these caves. Maybe you get a great reward, or maybe you end up having to fight a tough monster or take a very difficult penalty. Or you might land on a quest. That's where this quest deck comes into play. There's a whole array of quests of various types. Some of them will have, most of them will just have you rolling skill checks to see if you're able to do whatever it is that the flavor text on the deck says. And if you're able to do some of these quests, you take the quests back to the city or a shrine, you turn them in, and you get power-up cards, which we'll deal with in a moment. Otherwise, if none of these things are available to you, or there's one other thing, boss monsters, and we'll get to that. If none of those things are available to you, if you're just out in the wilderness, then each turn you're going to deal with these. This is the circumstances deck. And you can consider this sort of the random event deck. Sometimes you're going to fight monsters. Sometimes you're going to hit a natural occurrence that's bad for your party, like a flash flood. Sometimes you're going to catch a disease. Sometimes you're going to find yourself linked up with a little quest chain that you can follow. There's a whole array of them, and they keep you on your toes. They can be very deadly in the early game. I've had games where literally in 15 minutes, you're already facing like a young dragon or something like that will wipe your guys out. And in those instances, you can either choose to sort of ignore the card and cheat a little bit and move on, or just realize it was a bad turn of the game, time to move on. But thankfully, that's only the early game because you power up really fast in this game. The fast part is one of the things I really like about this game. The first time that I played it solo, I was wrapped up with an entire campaign, an entire big adventure in just 90 minutes. First time I played it with 3 friends, we played it in 2 sessions, but they were very short sessions, and I would say the whole thing only took us a little under 3 hours or so, and that was with the 2 of them learning how to play the game and a lot of chatter between us, because it's one of the fun things when you're playing a co-op is you get to talk amongst one another and make decisions amongst one another. What also happens fast is that your guy powers up fast. So that, of course, is the ultimate goal of the game. Power up, get as powerful as you can, because that boss fight with the Dead King is coming. And you power up in a couple of different ways. There's, of course, stopping in the towns where you can buy equipment and gear upgrades, which are noted on these cards. You pay a little money, your numbers tick up. The other is to complete quests and to defeat boss monsters. And that gets you access to the power-up deck. And the power-up deck has an array of power-ups, which you draw these at random, you assign them to your card, and boom, 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 your guys get boosted, 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 boosted. So that's why it benefits you to do quests and other things like that, so you can get these power-up cards and get yourself powerful. 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 And one of the best ways to do that is with boss monsters. The Hexplorer games all have an array of boss creatures. There are 10 in all in the Valley of the Dead King and other bosses in the other editions of the game as well. And these guys are pretty cool. These are extra tough battles, which each one of these creatures have extra tough abilities, and they are scattered across the board. These are optional fights, with the exception of the Dead King, which you can seek out these bosses, fight them, hopefully kill them, and gain the very, very big rewards that come with defeating them. For instance, if you beat the Cryovern, you get up to 4 of these power-up ability cards, lots of money, lots of other upgrades. However, they all have this long list of abilities that they can throw your way, and they can really kick your ass if you're not ready for them. But these are one of the best ways to get power-up cards so you can ready yourself for the big bad jerk himself, the Dead King. The final phase of each game turn is, of course, the Dead King himself. He's a big jerk. When the game first starts, you roll some dice to see if he enters the valley. If he doesn't enter the valley, you roll again the next turn, but the chances increase. They increase a little more each turn until finally it's inevitable the Dead King will arrive in the valley. Once he arrives, he's going to take over a city with his undead minions. From there, he just automatically travels from city to city to city, getting faster each time he takes a city, starting the ticking clock that you're working against in order to finally get powerful enough to defeat him. You can retake some of the cities that his undead hordes take. However, in order to do that, you have to visit a shrine, buy a talisman, which is relatively expensive, and take that talisman to the city and use it against his undead hordes. And there's only 4 talismans that you can get, 5 if you include the expansion, which means you're always eventually going to fight that Dead King. You can only put off the final battle for so long. Eventually, you're going to have to face the jerk himself. That's kind of the whole game in a nutshell. You wander around this valley, pursuing quests, fighting some monsters. You build yourself up, you fight the Dead King. Now, speaking of fighting, that is the one potential weak part of the game. However, I would make the argument that it's not a weakness, it's a strength. And that, of course, is the combat. The combat in this game is dead simple. Dead simple to the point where some people might find it a little repetitive. With all these colorful dice, you might assume that fighting is going to take the form of rolling some dice, doing some damage, and eventually doing that until you whittle away the monster. That's the way this stuff normally works, right? But that's not the way it works here. Here, there is next to no dice rolling. You have your monster card or your boss monster. There's some stats on there. You have your own card with your stats on there. You line everybody up. You have these handy mats that you use with your dry erase marker. This game is really driven by dry erase, as you can see. You decide what abilities your characters are going to use. You can decide that throughout your entire party, so maybe you're going to have 2 or 3 abilities that you're going to use. You roll a die to see what ability the enemy is going to use. So here I've rolled a Hex. He's going to use his Hex ability, and then you resolve everything at the same time. My abilities did X number of damage and healed this. His abilities did this sort of damage and had that effect. You resolve it all. If anyone's still standing, you move on to the next turn and you do it again. It's all just automatic. There's not any randomness to it except for deciding what the creature is going to do. You just decide what abilities you're going to use. You use them, and that's it. You mark the health or the energy off the battle mat, until somebody's at 0. And you move on, that's it, that's combat. Now, some people are going to really hate combat in this game because unlike, say, a war game like Battlelore behind me or a monstrosity like Gloomhaven, the combat in Valley of the Dead King and the entire Explored series doesn't involve a ton of strategy. There is some strategy, especially when you're fighting boss monsters, but a lot of that is sort of figuring out how different powers and abilities might interact with one another. The thing is, once you've figured out something that works, you're basically going to use that all the time. You're going to see a monster, you're going to see how many hit points it has, you're going to know pretty quickly whether or not you're going to be able to beat it, and if so, how much damage you're going to walk away from it with. But there's not a lot of guesswork involved, except maybe with the bosses who have some really insane abilities that can really mess you up. So if you're looking for a game that has really fun and interesting combat and a lot of tactical options, the Explored series is not for you. This is not a game about fighting. It's not a game about combat. It's a game about sort of exploring and creating an emergent narrative through your wanderings in the valley. And just kind of getting immersed in this world for a little while, either on your own or along with some friends without the need of a dungeon master. Which is to say, some people consider this sort of like a little mini D&D campaign in the box, and they're kind of right. In fact, that's kind of exactly what I love about the series. I love the fact that it's just a little fantasy campaign in a box that you can play on your own or with a couple of friends, no DM needed. It's different enough every time to keep it interesting, but it's also familiar enough when you return to it for multiple games that it's easy to set up, easy to get into, easy to play through. In fact, you can play through it relatively quickly, as I already mentioned earlier. I love that about it. I love the fact that unlike Gloomhaven or Mage Knight or a number of others, you don't have to devote half your life to playing through this game. It's just not necessary. You can when you add some expansions, but we'll touch on that in a moment. Right now, the thing that draws me to it is it's a little mini adventure in a box, different every time. I get to move my little miniature pieces across the map, have some adventures, box it all back up again without having to leave it out on a table for weeks on end and driving my family crazy with it. It's terrific. So, of course, there are expansions to this game because you can't put a game out in 2023. Of course, this game came out several years ago, but you can't put a game out these days without there being expansions. Now, I said that you can play just a quick, short campaign without having to worry about getting yourself fully immersed in this giant ongoing thing that's going to take you dozens of hours to play through. However, if you want to, you can. Thanks to Clicks Madness, the campaign book. This is an enormous 500-plus page book that is a full campaign you can play through just using this and the base game. But through this, it's basically a gigantic choose-your-own-adventure story that also has new rules and new fights to do, and this whole array of new creatures and new ways to exploit your various character classes and yada, 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 yada. It's a lot of stuff packed into this one book. I think at minimum, the playing through this story takes you somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 to 30 hours, and it could be as long as 40 hours if you're like super into it. Might even be longer than that. My math is very poor. Needless to say, if you really want something that's a little more focused, a little more narrative driven, not something that's as sandboxy as the core game, then Clicks Madness delivers that, and it is actually available right now. And as I'm recording this, the Kickstarter for the second campaign book has already started. I believe it's on GameFound. You would be able to order this through there as well. But yeah, if you want a big campaign, if that's something that you're looking for, you can have that. Other expansions are smaller and more manageable. The first and easiest one is the Living Card Deck. This thing's only about $15. Not only is it only about $15, but it's also free, sort of, online if you want to play with your devices. The way the Living Deck works is there are certain cards that are woven into the Quest deck and the Circumstances or Encounter deck in the core game. When you get one of these cards, there's a little QR code that's on it. You can scan that, and it brings up this card from this special deck that these cards are online and you can follow them. Or you can just actually buy the physical deck, and when one of those cards come up, you rotate in the physical deck. And this includes more powerful encounters, an entire quest chain that you can follow, more quests, more things like that. It's basically just more. It enhances and broadens the scope of things that you might be able to encounter, things that you might be able to do, goals that you might be able to have. So once you've exhausted or feel like you've exhausted a lot of possibilities in the core box, then you can add the Living Card Deck to expand even more on that. And each one of the 4 and counting games in the series, they each have their own living deck. So you can do this with all 4 games. There's going to be 6 games in the series in all. The 5th one is going to go to crowdfunding later this year. So for now, we're just talking about the 4, and they've all got these. The other expansion is Return to the Valley of the Dead King. This adds some additional cards. It adds some additional boss monsters that you can fight. It adds some new equipment that's in there. More cards that you can add to your Circumstances deck and that sort of thing. Though maybe the biggest change in here is that you can play as the Dead King. This adds the ability to play up to 1 to 7 players, with one of the players being the Dead King himself, wandering around the board, trying to thwart their plans and building himself up and throwing obstacles in their way until the big final battle happens. I haven't actually played that game mode, so I can't vouch for it because I got this as a co-op and a solo game, but that is available. Now, this expansion is about 35 or so bucks, and I have to be kind of a little bit honest. Is it worth the money? Later expansions to the series are awesome. This one, so. It adds a couple of exclusive races and a couple of exclusive classes that do play very cool, and they're better for solo play. So if you're buying this game specifically in order to play solo play, then you might like some of the additions that are in here. Otherwise, this one is very skippable. You're going to have plenty in the core box itself. And that's it. Valley of the Dead King is way more approachable than it seems. It's got this handy little dry erase system that keeps tracking things relatively easy and manageable. There may seem to be a lot of numbers on the surface, but it's actually pretty straightforward. One read through the rulebook and a playthrough on myself, and I had the system down like that. Now that doesn't mean the game doesn't get more complex as it goes on. Each game in the series adds layers of complexity and new systems to the game so that they each become more difficult to learn, more difficult to teach, and more difficult to play. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing depends on your point of view. I love the simplicity of this game, but I'm also really excited to explore the systems that are in the other games. You might find that this game is too much, in which case you just stay with this one. You're good. You can play this one for months. You could probably play a dozen different games and not see everything that's inside the core box. But if you crave more, if you want more systems, more different types of characters, more complexity, more things that you can do, there are now 3 and soon a 4th other games in the system, plus expansions, plus living card decks, plus more. So you can pile on the complexity and really turn this into a truly insanely epic game system. And what's nice is that each game in this series is kind of cross-compatible with one another, at least to the extent that characters and races and from any box can be used in any other box, and some aspects of some of the game systems can also cross over. There are traits and familiars and things like that. There's also rules in some of these boxes so that you can combine 2 of the games to have one big grand map. Another thing that's neat is in other versions of the game system, some of the basics change. So like in this one, the Dead King is your ticking clock, and he's going from city to city, and you're trying to outrace him. Other games have a different ticking clock, a different big boss to beat, a different way to beat them, a different way to evade them, and they get more interesting based on what that particular box is, and what that box's theme is. One is a forest theme, one is a desert theme, one is sort of a gothic vampire theme. So there's constantly new stuff coming your way. I'm a fan of this game series and this game system. It's a lot of fun to play solo. It's also a lot of fun to play as a group. I've played it with friends. We really enjoyed ourselves. We enjoyed creating our own stories as we wandered the valley, trying to dodge the Dead King and eventually getting ourselves powerful enough to go and defeat him. You can scale the difficulty up too if you don't find it challenging enough. You can play in easy settings or hard settings. It's very flexible, and that's something that I really like about it. There's just tons of flexibility in this one box. This game is still in print and still available, which is a nice thing because you know how board games are these days. If you follow the board game scene, things go out of print and they get very expensive very fast. This box you can find anywhere from, let's say, $70 to $90, which is a little on the expensive side. However, you get a lot in it and a lot of replay value in this box. So for me, this one's an easy recommendation. I'm having a great time with this game system. I'm playing through the other games in the system as well. I can't wait for more to come out, and I just absolutely love it. If you like the idea of basically playing really streamlined, quick, fast, mini D&D-like campaigns all on your own or with a couple of friends without the need of a dungeon master, check out Valley of the Dead King. I think you'll enjoy it. And if you like Valley of the Dead King, the whole Explore It series has much, much more to offer even beyond that. So check it out.